Close your eyes for just 1 second and imagine this. You gave a man the best years of your life. You believed in him when nobody else did. You worked beside him when he had nothing. You loved him even when loving him cost you everything. And then one morning he woke up, looked at you, and decided you were no longer worth keeping. He replaced you. He humiliated you. He walked away without a single look back. And then years later, after you had quietly rebuilt your entire life from the ground up, that same man sent you a wedding invitation. Not because he missed you. Not because he wanted peace. But because he wanted you to sit in that room and watch him win. He wanted you to see what your life looked like compared to his. He wanted you to feel small. He wanted you to ache. And here is the part that will stay with you long after this video ends. She went. She actually went. But she did not arrive the way he expected. She did not arrive broken. She did not arrive apologetic. She arrived in a convoy of black luxury SUVs with security at her side, a net worth that made his look like a college savings account, and 3 children standing quietly next to her. His triplets. The children he never knew existed. And from the moment she walked through those doors, nothing about that wedding would ever be the same again. Before we go any further, ask yourself something honestly. If the person who humiliated you, who discarded you like you were nothing, if that person invited you to watch them celebrate, would you go? Would you have the courage? Would you have the strength? Or would you stay home and let them believe they had already won? Most people would stay home. And honestly, most people would have a very good reason to. But Naomi Carter, that was her name, Naomi Carter had something to say. And she had waited long enough to say it. To understand why she showed up at that wedding, and what happened when she did, we have to go back to the very beginning. Back 15 years. Back to a tiny apartment in Columbus, Ohio, where a 22-year-old woman sat cross-legged on a second-hand couch with a business plan she had written by hand and a dream she refused to let anyone take from her. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Naomi Carter grew up in a working-class family in Columbus, Ohio. Her mother cleaned offices at night and her father drove delivery trucks during the day. They were not rich. But they were steady. And they taught Naomi something that would carry her for the rest of her life. They taught her that dignity is not something anyone can give you. It is something you build, one quiet decision at a time. By the time Naomi was 19, she was taking night classes at a community college while working at a retail store during the day. She was the kind of woman who made things work with whatever she had. No complaints. No excuses. Just work. It was at one of those night classes, a business management seminar on a Tuesday evening, that she first met Ethan Reynolds. He walked in 10 minutes late, sat in the chair right next to hers, and within 5 minutes had the whole room laughing at something he said. That was Ethan. He had a presence that was almost magnetic. He could walk into a room and immediately change the temperature of it. Naomi was not the kind of woman who fell quickly. But she fell for Ethan. Not because of his charm, though he had plenty of it. She fell for him because after class, when everyone else had left, he asked to see her notes. And then he sat across from her for 2 hours talking about ideas. Real ideas. About starting businesses. About creating something from nothing. About building a future. That was the version of Ethan she fell in love with. The dreamer. The man who believed the world could be different if you worked hard enough. They dated for a year. Then they married young, both of them 23, both of them poor, both of them absolutely convinced that together they were unstoppable. The early years were genuinely beautiful. They shared a small apartment. They cooked cheap meals and talked until 2 in the morning about where they would be in 10 years. They celebrated small wins like they were major victories. When Ethan landed his first client for his small technology consulting business, Naomi made a homemade dinner and they sat on the floor because they had not yet bought a kitchen table. Those were real moments. Honest moments. The kind of moments that make you believe love is enough to survive anything. And for a while it was. The business grew slowly at first. Then faster. Then investors started calling. Contracts arrived. Revenue climbed. And somewhere in the middle of all that growth, something inside Ethan began to shift. It was not dramatic. It did not happen overnight. It was gradual, the way erosion works, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, until one day you look at the cliff and realize that something significant has been lost. The man who once said, "we," began saying, "I." The husband who once asked Naomi's opinion on every business decision began waving her thoughts away mid-sentence. Small dismissals became routine. Routine dismissals became contempt. He started surrounding himself with new people, investors, executives, social climbers, and Naomi noticed that around those people, he spoke about her differently. Less like a partner. More like a footnote. She tried to talk to him. Multiple times. She would wait until the guests were gone and the house was quiet and she would sit across from him and say, "I feel like I'm disappearing from your life, Ethan." And he would look at her the way you look at something mildly inconvenient and say she was being dramatic. She was not being dramatic. She was watching a marriage die one dismissal at a time. Then came the night everything collapsed. It was a Wednesday, late, and Ethan's phone kept buzzing on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. Naomi was not the type to go through anyone's phone. But the buzzing did not stop. When she picked it up, she was not expecting what she found. Message after message. A woman named Cassandra. The kind of messages that left absolutely no room for interpretation. Naomi sat down on the kitchen floor and did not move for a long time. The shower was still running. The phone was still in her hand. And something broke inside her that night, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. When Ethan came out and saw her sitting there, he did not apologize. He did not cry. He did not beg. He looked at the phone in her hands and sighed the way a man sighs when he is tired of a conversation that has not even started yet. He said the marriage had not been working for a long time. He said they both knew it. He said he was sorry she had to find out this way. But the word sorry did not reach his eyes. Within 3 weeks he had filed for divorce. And the proceedings that followed were nothing short of calculated humiliation. He had the lawyers. He had the money. He had the social connections. Friends who had sat at their dinner table suddenly had no memory of knowing Naomi's name. Family members went cold. The story that circulated through their social circle was that Naomi had somehow held him back. That she had not been supportive enough. That he had outgrown the relationship. Not a single person in that world stopped to ask Naomi her side. She was simply erased. What nobody in that courtroom knew, what nobody at all knew, was that Naomi was pregnant. She had taken the test 4 days before the divorce was finalized. 3 lines. Not 1. 3. Triplets. She sat in a gas station bathroom and stared at that test for what felt like an hour. She was 31 days away from being legally divorced. She was financially devastated. She had no safety net, no support system, and the father of her children had just spent 3 weeks legally dismantling her existence. She thought about telling him. She sat with that thought for a long time. She imagined the call. She imagined his reaction. But every time she got close to making that call, she remembered who Ethan had become. She remembered the coldness in his eyes. She remembered the lawyers. She remembered the way he had let people erase her without saying a word in her defense. And she was terrified, not of Ethan himself, but of what Ethan, with money and lawyers and connections, could do to children who were legally his. She feared he would use them as leverage. She feared they would grow up in a custody war that served no one but his ego. So she made the most agonizing decision of her life. She disappeared. She packed what fit in 2 suitcases. She called in 2 days of work, drove 6 hours to Cincinnati where she had a distant cousin, and never went back. No forwarding address. No social media accounts. No contact. She simply ceased to exist in the world that Ethan Reynolds occupied. She was alone, pregnant with triplets, and starting from zero. Now think about that for a moment. Think about what that actually means. Not as a movie scene, but as a real human experience. No family nearby. No savings worth speaking of. A body carrying 3 children at once. Morning sickness so severe some days she could barely stand up. And the knowledge that somewhere out there the man responsible for all of it was probably at a rooftop dinner toasting to his new life. That is what Naomi was living. That is what she woke up to every single morning. The triplets arrived in March, 7 months after she left Columbus. 2 boys and a girl. She named them Marcus, James, and Claire. She went through the delivery with a nurse and a midwife and her cousin in the room, no fanfare, no announcements, just the quiet, exhausted miracle of 3 lives entering the world at once. She cried for a long time afterward. Not from sadness exactly. It was something more complicated than that. It was the weight of knowing that 3 people now depended entirely on her, and that she was going to have to carry that weight without anyone to share it. She took 6 weeks before returning to work. Then she worked 2 jobs. Retail during the day, data entry at night, while her cousin helped watch the babies. The money was never enough. There were weeks where she had to choose between formula and electricity. There were nights she sat at her kitchen table with a calculator and a sinking feeling that no matter how many times she ran the numbers they would not come out right. But she kept going. Because the alternative was unthinkable. Around the time the triplets turned 2, Naomi made a decision that would eventually change everything. She had been doing data entry for a small e-commerce company on a freelance basis, and one evening the owner messaged her in frustration about the fact that his online sales were completely stagnant despite heavy spending on advertising. He did not expect her to have an answer. He was just venting. But Naomi had been reading. Studying. Watching videos on digital marketing strategy at night after the children fell asleep. She sent him back a 12-paragraph message laying out exactly where his ad spend was going wrong and what she would do differently. He called her the next morning and asked how much she charged for consulting. She made up a number on the spot, $300 for a monthly audit. He said yes immediately. That was the beginning. $300 became $1,000. $1,000 became a retainer. Word spread the way good results always spread, quietly but steadily. A florist in Cincinnati. A hardware store in Dayton. A regional clothing brand looking to grow online. Each client led to another. Each success built credibility she had not had to borrow from anyone. By the time the triplets started kindergarten, Naomi had formally registered her business. By the time they were in 2nd grade, she had a team of 4 working for her. By the time they were in 4th grade, she had signed her first contract with a mid-sized national company in the consumer goods sector. And then, 3 years before the wedding invitation arrived, she got the call that genuinely changed the scale of everything. A struggling tech company in Nashville was hemorrhaging clients and had been referred to her by one of her existing accounts. They were in serious trouble. Their digital presence was outdated, their marketing approach was tone-deaf, and they had 6 months of runway before they would have to make very painful decisions about the business. Naomi flew to Nashville, spent 2 days reviewing their systems, and came back with a turnaround strategy that their internal team had not even come close to developing. She presented it on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday morning they had offered her an equity stake in the company in exchange for implementing it. She took it. What happened next she could not have fully predicted, but she had believed in the math. Within 18 months the company had tripled its customer base. The equity stake she had accepted became worth several $1 million when a larger firm acquired the company. Naomi Carter, the woman who had once chosen between formula and electricity, was now a millionaire. And she did not stop there. She reinvested. Properties in Cincinnati and Nashville. Stakes in 3 other companies she believed in. A financial advisor who helped her structure everything with discipline. By the time the triplets were 13 years old, Naomi Carter's net worth was something that would have been impossible for the 22-year-old sitting on that second-hand couch to fully comprehend. She had also raised 3 extraordinary human beings. Marcus was the serious one, methodical, precise, the child who always thought before he spoke. James was the one who could talk to anyone, warm and funny in a way that reminded Naomi of someone she no longer liked to think about. And Claire was the one who saw everything. The quiet observer who noticed things other people missed and processed them with a depth that sometimes startled even her mother. They were 13, and they were remarkable. They knew the outline of their story. They knew their mother had left a difficult marriage before they were born. They knew they had a father somewhere they had never met. They had asked questions over the years, gently, and Naomi had answered them as honestly as she could without burdening them with the full weight of adult cruelty. She had told them there would be a time for the full story. She just had not known when that time would arrive. Until the envelope came. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in October. A cream-colored envelope with a formal return address she did not immediately recognize. When she opened it and saw Ethan's name on the invitation card, she went very still. It was addressed to her specifically. Her full name, her current address, which meant someone had found her, and it was accompanied by a handwritten note on embossed card stock. And the note was not kind. It was not an olive branch. It was dressed in polite language the way some knives are dressed in silk. He wrote that he wanted her to attend. He wrote that he wanted her to see how far he had come. There were phrases in there about letting the past go, about moving forward, about wishing her well, but the undertone of every line was the same. He knew where she was. He knew what she had been doing. And he believed, clearly, that the distance between his life and her life was still as wide as it had been the day she left. He wanted her to sit in a room full of his success and feel the gap. He wanted witnesses to her smallness. That was what the invitation was really for. How do you know that? Because a man who genuinely wished someone well after a decade of silence does not choose his wedding day to make contact. He does not frame the invitation as an opportunity for her to see what she missed. A man at peace does not poke. Only a man still measuring himself against something sends that kind of message. Naomi read the note twice. Then she set it down on the kitchen table and stood at the window for a long time. That evening, when the triplets came home from school, Marcus found the envelope on the table and picked it up before she could reach it. He read the invitation. Then he read the note. He looked up at her and asked, very quietly, "Mom, is this our father?" The room went completely still. Claire, who had been in the kitchen, walked to the doorway and stood there listening. James came in from the hallway. All 3 of them looked at her. And Naomi understood that the moment she had been both dreading and preparing for had arrived. She sat them down at the kitchen table, the same table where years ago she had sat with a calculator trying to make the numbers work, and she told them everything. The real version. Not the edited one she had offered them in pieces over the years. She told them about the marriage, about the affair, about the divorce and the humiliation. She told them why she had left. She told them about the fear of losing them to a custody system she could not have competed in at the time. She told them about the years of rebuilding. She told them about the choice she had made and why she had made it. When she was done, nobody spoke for a long time. Then James, who could talk to anyone, said something that surprised her. He said, "I think we should go." Naomi looked at him. He said, "Not for him. For us." We deserve to know who he is. And he deserves to know who we are. Claire nodded. Marcus said, only if you want to, Mom. She looked at her 3 children, 13 years old, clear-eyed, calm, and felt something shift in her chest. Not rage. Not grief. Something that felt, actually, like relief. She called her assistant the next day and told her to accept the invitation. Then she started making arrangement. If you are still watching, comment, I am still watching, below. Because the biggest moment of this story is still coming, and you do not want to miss what happens when Naomi Carter walks through those doors. And honestly, pause for just a second. Think about how you would feel in her position. You have spent 13 years building a life that no one can take from you. You have raised 3 children alone. You have become more successful than the man who tried to make you feel worthless. And now you are being invited to sit in the audience of his celebration. Would you go? Comment your answer below. We genuinely want to know. The wedding was held at a private estate outside of Nashville. 300 guests. A live orchestra. A catering team that had worked events for governors and executives. The kind of wedding that announces itself before you arrive, helicopters overhead, luxury cars at the valet, photographers positioned at the entrance. Inside, the chandeliers alone cost more than some people's cars. Ethan Reynolds had done what he always said he would do. He had made it. On the outside, at least, the picture was complete. His new fiancée, a woman named Vivian, came from old money and moved through social spaces with the practiced ease of someone who had never once worried about a utility bill. She was beautiful. She was elegant. She was entirely unaware of what was about to walk through the front door of her wedding. Ethan had told Vivian that his ex-wife might attend. He had framed it as an act of generosity on his part, inviting someone he had once hurt as a way of showing growth. Vivian, who trusted him, had accepted that framing. She did not know about the note. She did not know the invitation had been designed to humiliate. She was operating on a version of the story that Ethan had carefully constructed for himself over years of telling it. That version did not include triplets. The convoy arrived at 20 minutes past 2 in the afternoon. 3 black SUVs, unhurried, moving in formation. Guests who had been gathering on the estate's front lawn turned to look. Nobody had ordered a 3-car security detail. The vehicles stopped near the entrance. 2 security personnel stepped out of the lead car first. Then the rear door of the second vehicle opened. And Naomi Carter stepped out. She was wearing a structured deep navy dress, not loud, not trying to compete, just quietly impeccable. She carried herself with the ease of someone who had absolutely nothing to prove and knew it. And then the children emerged. Marcus. James. Claire. 13 years old. Dressed with quiet precision. And every person standing on that lawn who had known Ethan Reynolds for more than 5 minutes went rigid with recognition. The resemblance was not subtle. It was not a matter of interpretation. Those 3 children shared Ethan's face with a specificity that no tailor or stylist could manufacture. The same brow line. The same jaw. The same distinctive dark eyes. You did not need a paternity test to understand what you were seeing. A murmur spread through the crowd like a current. Then the murmur became something louder. Inside the estate, someone must have said something, because Ethan himself appeared at the top of the entrance stairs, dressed in his wedding suit, composed, prepared to receive his guests with the satisfaction of a man who believed this moment belonged to him. He saw the convoy. He saw the security. And then he saw the woman walking toward him, and behind her he saw 3 faces that reached into something deep in his chest and pulled. He gripped the railing. He did not move. Naomi walked up the steps without hurrying. She met his eyes at the top and said, simply and clearly, so that anyone nearby could hear, "Hello, Ethan. There are 3 people here who have been waiting their entire lives to meet you. I thought today seemed like a good time." The silence was the loudest thing in the room. Vivian appeared at Ethan's shoulder seconds later. She looked at Naomi. She looked at the children. She looked at the children's faces. And the question she had been about to ask visibly died on her lips as the answer made itself known without anyone having to say a word. Naomi did not perform the moment. She did not dramatize it. She simply guided the triplets forward and introduced them by name. Marcus. James. Claire. Ethan looked as though the ground beneath him had become uncertain. He tried to speak. He managed something that sounded like the beginning of a sentence and then stopped. One of the older guests, a man who had known the Reynolds family for 20 years, leaned toward the person next to him and whispered something. Then that person whispered to the next. The wave of realization moved through the crowd in under 2 minutes. And then something Naomi had not fully anticipated happened. A prominent business executive who had been seated in the front row stood up and walked toward her with his hand extended. He introduced himself and told her he had been trying to get a meeting with her company for months. His assistant had been going through proper channels, he said, but perhaps fate had a more direct approach in mind. Another guest recognized her from a profile that had run in a regional business publication 8 months prior. Then a third. Within 10 minutes of arriving, Naomi Carter was being greeted by people who knew her not as Ethan's ex-wife but as the founder and CEO of a consulting firm whose name carried weight in rooms that Ethan Reynolds had not yet been invited into. The irony was not lost on anyone. Ethan watched all of this. Standing at the top of the stairs. Unable to move. Unable to speak. The wedding he had planned as an audience for her diminishment had become an audience for something else entirely. Inside, when some semblance of order was attempted and guests were ushered toward their seats, Ethan sought Naomi out privately. They stood in a side room off the main hall, just the two of them. The first thing he said was that she had no right to do this here. She listened to him finish. Then she said, calmly, that he was the one who had chosen the venue. He had sent the invitation. He had written the note. He had wanted her in the room. Well, she was in the room. He asked why she had hidden the children. She told him the truth, not the version designed to protect him from it, but the actual truth. She had been terrified of what he would do with access and resources that she, at the time, did not have. She had been afraid of a custody system that at the time felt entirely weighted against her. She had made the decision she believed would protect them. He told her it had not been her decision to make. She agreed with him. She said she knew it was not a perfect decision. She said she had carried the weight of it for 13 years. But she also said that the man she had left was not a man she had trusted with 3 newborns, and he knew, if he was honest, that she had not been wrong to be afraid of the person he had become during the divorce. The silence between them was long. Then Ethan asked if the children knew about him. Naomi said they did. She said they had questions. She said they were old enough to decide for themselves what kind of relationship, if any, they wanted to pursue. She was not going to make that decision for them. She was not going to block it either. What happened next was entirely up to him, and entirely up to them. Then she did something unexpected. She put a business card on the table between them. Not hers. A family mediator she trusted. She said that if he wanted to begin somewhere honest, that was a place to start. And then she walked back out into the main hall. The ceremony itself was never completed that day. Vivian, in what was later described by multiple guests as one of the more composed exits they had ever witnessed at a wedding, quietly gathered her things and left before the reception could begin. She left a note for Ethan. Nobody who saw it would repeat what it said. But the look on his face when he read it said more than enough. In the months that followed, there were attempts at legal pressure. Ethan's family, particularly his mother, engaged attorneys and made noise about custody and financial claims. They had done the same thing once before to a version of Naomi that could not fight back. They had not updated their understanding of who she was now. Naomi's legal team, a firm she had worked with for 3 years, one that operated at a level considerably above what Ethan's family had retained, answered every filing with something more precise. The pressure campaign lasted 4 months. Then it stopped. Because it became apparent, through the financial documentation that Naomi's team quietly placed into discovery, that certain business interests in Ethan's family's portfolio were more exposed than anyone had realized, and that the woman across the table was not in a position that required her to settle for anything less than exactly what was fair. Ethan eventually reached out through the mediator Naomi had recommended. The process was slow. It was uncomfortable. There were sessions that ended early and conversations that had to be revisited multiple times. But something genuine began to emerge from it, not a reconciliation, not a restored friendship, but a fragile and honest beginning to a co-parenting arrangement that the triplets had been given the right to guide. Marcus was cautious. He took the longest to agree to meetings. James was more open, though he asked harder questions than anyone expected from a 13-year-old. Claire, the observer, said almost nothing in the early sessions and then one afternoon delivered a 5-minute statement to Ethan that, according to the mediator, reduced every adult in the room to silence. She had questions she wanted answered before she would agree to any regular contact. And her questions were fair. Ethan answered them. He did not answer them perfectly. But he answered them honestly. And that mattered. Naomi watched all of this from a careful distance, supporting each of her children individually, letting each of them move at their own pace. She did not push them toward forgiveness. She did not warn them away from it either. She had done her part. The rest belonged to them. There is something about this story that goes deeper than success. Deeper than money. Deeper than the very satisfying image of a woman walking into a room she was supposed to shrink in and instead making that room rearrange itself around her. What this story is actually about is the cost of disappearing versus the cost of staying. Naomi chose to disappear. For 13 years she carried the weight of that choice, the loneliness of it, the doubt, the nights when she wondered if she had made the wrong call. And she also chose, when the moment came, to reappear. Not to destroy. Not to punish. But to tell the truth. To let her children stand in the daylight. To introduce herself to a room full of people as exactly who she had become, on her own terms, through her own work, with her own name. She never needed Ethan Reynolds to succeed. She never needed his money, his connections, or his approval. What she needed was time, and she used every day of it. And here is what I want you to sit with after this video ends. There is a version of Naomi's story that ends with bitterness. Where the woman who rebuilds does so with clenched fists, where every success is really just an extension of the wound, where the wedding scene is about revenge rather than truth. That version exists. But that was not the version Naomi chose. She chose something harder. She chose to build something real enough that the revenge took care of itself. She did not need to arrange it. She did not need to plan it. She simply became undeniable, and then she showed up. And when she walked out of that estate that evening, with Marcus on her left and James on her right and Claire holding her hand, she did not look back at the chaos she was leaving behind. Because that chaos was never what she had come for. She had come so her children could stand in the same room as their history and decide for themselves what they wanted to do with it. That is what good parenting looks like. That is what real strength looks like. Not the absence of pain. Not the performance of invincibility. But the decision, made quietly, every single day, to keep building something worth returning to. Now I want to hear from you. And please, be honest in the comments, because this is the kind of story that makes you think about your own life. If you were Naomi, would you have gone to that wedding? Would you have had the courage to walk through those doors knowing what you were walking into? And what about the triplets, Claire, Marcus, James, 3 teenagers who only just learned the full truth about their father and were already composed enough to decide for themselves how to respond? Does that move you? Because it should. Think about what those children represent. They are the product of every sacrifice Naomi made in the dark, when nobody was watching, when there was no applause and no reward and no guarantee that anything she was building would amount to anything. They are the result of years of sleepless nights, of impossible math, of dignity held together by sheer refusal to collapse. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think about the people in your own life who are quietly building something extraordinary when the world is not looking, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you are not already subscribed. And leave a comment. Tell me how this made you feel. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me which character you connected with most. Because stories like this one matter most when they stop being stories and start becoming mirrors. Naomi Carter looked into hers and chose not to look away. I hope something in her story gives you the same kind of courage. The next story we are covering may be even more astonishing. You are not going to want to miss it.